Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Tech Thursday live stream. This is part 2 of our in-context design. Last time we met, we did this, we were started to work on this assembly here, and today I'm going to continue creating some of the parts. I need to turn off my audio just a second. Sorry guys. So I want to start out by answering a couple questions that have come up since this first one, and one of them was, what about tolerancing? And what do I mean by that? Well, as we look at this assembly here, when we created it the last time, I basically used the inside of this part to define the width of this. And you can see that there's zero clearance in here. And again, we're giving you methods and ideas on how you can design, but when you go to manufacture this, you have to have the experience and the knowledge on how is this going to be manufactured. And so typically what people will do is they'll use, for example, tolerance blocks on their drawings. When they've dimensioned their drawings, they might have a tolerance block in the corner that says any dimension that's like 1 decimal place might be a tolerance of 5 thousandths. Any decimal that's at any dimension that's at 2 decimal places might be like 2 thousandths or something like that. Another way is you could actually physically model in the tolerance if you wanted to. So for example, I'm just going to press this in a little bit. Let's just go minus 0.02. And you can physically see now there's some clearance in there. So with that said, I'm not telling you this is how you should do it. Hopefully you'll do the research or have the experience on figuring out how would you physically manufacture these parts. There's many different ways you can do this, and what I'm showing here is kind of that in-context idea where you're using existing models to create new models, and I'm going to continue with that today. Okay, so let me jump in. We left off here last week, and I've uploaded the drawing with a bunch more sheets on it. So it has, for example, the shaft drawing, the bushing drawing, etc. This is in the description of this live stream, so you'll want to go ahead and download this latest drawing set. So we're going to start with this pin. Now, you'll notice I have all of the dimensions on the drawing, and I could model this pin using these dimensions. But here's where the in-context part kind of comes into play, and I think this is really fun. We're going to use existing geometry to help us design. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I'm designing parts, I might start with maybe like this base or something, and then I start creating the other parts around it. And I'm using existing geometry to help me with that. So for example, I know that I want a pin that's going to go through here, but you'll notice that we have 2 different size holes in here. And I basically want the pin to rest against maybe this face right here, for example. So I'm actually going to start out with a very simple design. So the first thing I'm going to do, let me go ahead and delete this, remove it because I already had it in there. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new component. So I'm going to right mouse click at my top level and say new component. And like I've mentioned in previous live streams, you want to try using components as much as possible because it really does simplify your design. You'll notice all of my other parts are kind of ghosted out right now, and my pin is the current active part, or component I should say. So what I'm going to do now is just create a sketch on this outside face. And according to the drawing, the diameter is 7/8. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a circle that's 7/8 in diameter. So I can type in 7/8, which is kind of cool. I don't have to do the math in my head automatically. It'll do it for me. So you can actually see there 0.875. And believe it or not, I'm actually done with this. I'm going to finish my sketch. I'll select the profile that I want and say extrude. Now I know that I want it to go a certain distance this way. In fact, I want it to go to this face. I'm going to go ahead and just click on that face. But I also know, according to the drawing, that it needs to go to the right a little bit. So one of the tips, I'm going to be sharing lots of tips in this live stream. One of the tips I'm going to use is, instead of just saying one side, I can say two sides, and that actually allows me to go two different directions. So I can go to the left one distance, and to the right another distance. In this case, I need to go 3/16 of an inch. Now notice there's a negative sign, so I'm going to have to type in -3/16. And I'll say OK. Now you're probably sitting there going, well, if we turn on our analysis, we're obviously clashing with our other parts. And sure enough, we are. OK. Oops, not origin, analysis. So I'm going to use these existing parts to change my design. I'll come in here and say modify, combine. Now this is a really powerful command, and unfortunately some people think all it does is combine parts together, but it's actually 3 or 4 commands in one. Okay, so I'll go ahead and say combine, and it says what is the target? Well, this is the target. And then what is the tool? What are we going to use? And I'm going to select my frame, and notice the preview, and that's because of this operation. I mentioned it's not just a combine, like join things together. You can actually join things together, combine them together, or you can cut them apart, or you could say intersect, only keep what's intersecting between the parts. Well, in this case, we're going to say cut, and I'm also going to select that other shape, this other part, and notice what we're getting. It's basically taking this solid cylinder that was going all the way through these parts and saying, I'm going to remove what's clashing, basically. I'm going to cut that away. I'll go ahead and say OK. Let's turn on our analysis again, and you can see what our pin looks like. So we, instead of having to create a whole bunch of dimensions or whatever, and again, this is basically like I mentioned earlier, 0 tolerance, but this pin will fit inside of these parts when they're manufactured using tolerancing. Okay, now with that said, one of the things I typically do is like, okay, that looks pretty cool, and I notice my overall length of this pin is 1.5. And I want to verify that, okay? Especially when I'm doing this kind of design, even though I've got a fully dimensioned drawing, I want to make sure that that's 1.5. So I'm going to click on this measure. I'll click on that face there and this face over here. Making sure I grab the face. And notice it says the distance is 1.438. So even though I use this really cool trick, the cylinder wasn't quite long enough, okay? Because I basically captured to this back face right here, when in reality the pin actually sticks out a little bit. So how do we fix this? Well, here's the first really cool trick I want to show. I'm going to go ahead and click on this face. And I want to make sure, you'll notice when I click on it, it actually selects the wrong face. I'm going to click and hold to make sure I get this end face right here. I'll right mouse click and do a press pull. So I'm basically going to add some geometry to this. Well, how much geometry do I need to add? I don't know, and I don't want to have to know. I don't want to have to do a whole bunch of calculations or whatever. But what it's saying is I've added 0.578 inches of material from where it was. Well, check this out. I hit this little down arrow and I can say re-anchor. And what this is going to allow me to do is, instead of measuring from this edge, I can measure from way over here. So I'm going to say re-anchor. I'll click on that face, and now you can see that dimension in there says 2.016, right? So it's saying that this face is 2 plus inches from this face. And I can come in and say, well, I know that that has to be 1.5. So I'll say 1.5. And sure enough, the total length of this pin now is 1.5 inches. So I use that re-anchor command. Instead of measuring it from this face here, I wanted to measure it from this face way back here. I see a couple of thumbs up showing up in the chat. I forgot to mention Aaron is back, and he is helping me out. Also, my buddy Angelo looks like he's on. So if you have any tolerance type questions, since he's a way better machinist than I could ever imagine being, he might be able to answer those for you. So Aaron and Angelo, thanks again for helping out. So yes, I think this is a really cool trick with that re-anchor command. So believe it or not, I'm almost done with my design. You can kind of see how the 3D model or models helped shape this design right here, this taper down, you can kind of see. So I need to throw in a chamfer, looks like, and I need to throw in a radius and then this slot. So let's just go ahead and do that really quick. So I might put my chamfer on here. So let me click on this edge right there. Say chamfer, and again it was 1/16 according to the drawing, and there we go. Now I get this question a lot. I need to put that slot through the side here, but there's also a fillet that goes all the way around, and does it matter which order I do this in? And the answer is it really kind of depends. So for example, if I put the slot through first, it's going to require me to select 2 edges to put that fillet on. But if I put the fillet on first and then machined in the slot, I'd only have to select 1 edge. Now you might be saying 1 edge versus 2 edges. Well, if you're doing a lot of CAD design, every little step matters as it adds up. So I personally like to make things as simple as possible. So I'm going to put the fillet on first, because I'd only have to select this 1 edge. So I'll select it, say fillet, and according to the drawing it's 1/16. And you can see how it went all the way around. And then the last thing I need to do is put my slot through there. So I'm going to click on the face, say create the sketch. And here's another neat little trick. I'm going to say rectangle. And I've shown this before. I could go into create rectangle and come down and pick whichever rectangle I want. Or I'm in no command. I could hit R for rectangle, and it shows me my 3 rectangle types over here in my sketch palette. And I'm actually going to do a center rectangle. I'll grab the center here, start to drag, and I know the thickness, or the height I should say, is 1/8. So I'm going to type in 1 divided by 8. And honestly, the length doesn't matter. So I'm just going to hit enter. So I know for a fact that this is 1/8 of an inch tall. And I'll just say finish my sketch. Then I can select these profiles. Let me grab the profile here. Say extrude or press pull. They're pretty much the exact same command. Doesn't really matter. And I like to start to drag to visually see what it's going to look like. And I can see that it's going in the negative direction. Okay, so I'm going to type in minus 1/16 of an inch. Okay, now I'm typing in a dimension right there. And I know for a fact that it's going minus 1/16. Well, check this out. I can also, I'll grab these profiles again. Say press pull or extrude. I can actually click on like an edge, for example, and you can see that it's going to snap to that edge. So instead of having to type in a distance, I could click on a face or an edge and it's going to snap to that particular edge. So there we go. We've actually very quickly finished our pin. And again, what I'm showing here is I'm not saying this is how you should design or how you have to design. It's more if you're coming up with an idea and you want to just kind of like start building things on top of each other and say, okay, I know this is going to be supported by a bracket. There's going to be some pins that go in here that I might have to machine. You can use the existing geometry to help you speed up your design. Now, to speed things up even more, I know that I need to have a pin on the other side, so I'm going to use the mirror command. So I'll say mirror. What's the pattern type? By default, you'll see that it comes up as faces, but we also have bodies, features, and components. Now, which one should I use? Well, features is like a fillet or a chamfer or a hole or something like that. These down here in my timeline are my features. Like here's the chamfer, the fillet, the extrude, etc. Bodies, if it would be what I would use if I have just like a single body, but I'm actually working with components, and you can tell that by these little cube icons that we see in the browser. And we also see that cube icon right here. So it makes sense for me to mirror the pin component. So I'll say components, which is my object, the pin. What's my mirror plane? As soon as I click on select, you'll see that it brings up my origin, and I can actually select. I'm going to kind of rotate around so you can kind of see what's going on here. There's my origin. In fact, if I turn that on, you can see that. I'll click on it, and it's going to mirror that pin across the center of this whole assembly. I'll say OK. And then we'll see that we have pin and pin mirror. Okay. So we now have this put together down here. The next part we want to work on is, I'll just go to the next little icon here, is the shaft part. And again, I dimensioned a majority of it, but again, we're going to use 3D geometry to help us out. Now I'm going to create this slightly different just to show you other methods. Okay, so let me jump over here. Again, what I'll do is right click at the top level and say new component, and I want to name this. I'll call it shaft. We can see the pins have kind of ghosted out, and our current component now is the shaft. Okay, so I'll start a new sketch and I'll do this front plane. Now, in the last example, I used a 3D part, and I had it intersecting this frame, and we kind of combined, cut it away. This method, I'm going to show how you can use projected geometry to help you create a sketch. So instead of 3D, we're going to do it a little bit more 2D this time. So I'm going to use the create project command, or the P key for the shortcut. And when I do that, you'll notice I have two options in this selection filter. One is entities and one is bodies. Okay? Now watch what happens. Right now it's selected to entities, and as I get near geometry, you can kind of see how it's going to project, for example, this spline. It'll project just this edge. If I click on bodies, notice kind of like the preview. You see it's almost doing like a silhouette trace. So it's not projecting like these little splines right here. It's basically projecting the whole outside of it. So this allows you to basically get different results using these selection filters. Okay, well, I want to project this cylinder right here, and so I'm going to rotate a little bit more isometric so you can kind of see what's going on. But notice what happens when I kind of hover over that circular cylinder. You can kind of see this line right here. So if I click, it basically projected, let me turn off the frame, it projected those two lines of that cylinder. So hopefully you can kind of see what it did there. You'll notice it didn't project the horizontal lines or anything like that. And that's because I basically selected on the cylinder, and it's basically projecting the edges of it, which are the ends. Okay, so I'll do the same thing over on this side, which is a smaller cylinder. In fact, notice if I hover over this face, it's wanting to project all the way from the top to the bottom. If I hover over this cylinder, it's only projecting the edge of that cylinder right there. And I'll say OK also. So we basically grabbed information from the 3D geometry to help us with our sketch. Okay, so now I'm going to come in and basically draw the profile of this to create my design. So I can see, 5/8, 3/4, 7/8, etc. So I'm going to use those dimensions again. So let's go ahead and maybe draw a center line. So I just have to get near this edge right here. You can kind of see how it does catches to the center, and then same thing here, it kind of catches to the center right there. Now this is an object line, and what I'm basically doing is I want to create some light pencil lines and kind of trace over everything. So I'm going to select that line and change it to a construction line, and when I do that, you'll notice it turns dashed. It is no longer an object line, it's kind of like a light pencil line. Okay. Next thing I might do is, using some of the dimensions that I have, I know that it's going to go through this edge here and it's going to go through this edge here, but I don't know where this middle part is. So I'm going to use the offset command. This is a pretty powerful command. I'll click on that line, and you can see that we can offset this a certain distance. Well, I know that the diameter that I need it to be is, the diameter is 3/4. So if I go like that, you'll see it's going to do 3/4. But I need half of that. And I showed this in the last example. I can't just type in divided by 2. Well, I guess I could. Catch me surprised. I didn't think I could do that. So that's interesting. Let me show you how you should do it. I'm going to put this 3/4 in parentheses. So we're basically, doing mathematical orders right here. So we're putting 3/4 in the parentheses, and we're dividing that by 2. Okay? So that's how you typically would have to do it. And I'll say OK. And you can see that it took that line and it offset it half of 3/4. Okay. So now I actually have enough geometry that I could start drawing. So I could start here, come over to there. I'll connect those 2 dots there. I'll connect those 2 dots there. And I'll come over to here, for example. And then the last thing I need to do is we're going to revolve this around. So I need to come down to this center point, and let's go all the way across. And you'll notice as soon as I do that, it kind of shades in and shows me my profile. And that's this option right here, show profile. If you don't like it, you can turn that off. I personally like it because it shows me that that's a valid closed profile. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish my sketch. And I have enough information here to start creating this part. So I'm going to grab my profile. And for those of you that haven't seen this in previous live streams that I've done, you'll notice that I can select this profile, but this profile is buried by this other part. I could turn off the frame, but a neat trick is to click and hold for about a second, and it allows you to probe through until I get to that profile. So I'll select that, and then same thing here, click and hold, grab the profile. I love that tip. I use it all the time. Okay, we're going to create a revolution or a revolve. There's my profiles. 3 of them are selected. What's my axis? We're going to go around this center axis, and there's my 3D model. And again, it fits perfectly because we're using information from the 3D model. But this time, we projected it onto our sketch instead of doing, you know, like machining type stuff like cuts and stuff like that. Okay. Now, for the really observant of those of you attending, I've purposely made a mistake, and we're going to run into that mistake here in a little bit, and I'll show you how we can get around fixing it. So, I haven't checked the chat, but you'll see an issue come up here in just a second. Okay, so I'm going to start working on the holes back here, and you can actually see, let me kind of zoom up on this area. There's a drill that goes all the way through, and you can see it has a drill point at the end, and then there's a drill that goes to the top. I'm going to show you some really neat tips and tricks using the hole command. And then finally, we can see that there's this BSP pipe thread in there also we're going to deal with. Okay, so I personally like using the hole command. Instead of creating another sketch, typing in dimensions, doing an extrude, having to taper the ends, I'm going to use the hole command. Now it's asking for a face. I purposely click, I kind of over exaggerate, I click away and out of where it needs to be. Obviously it's off center. Okay, and you'll see why here in just a second. You can see the different hole types: simple, counterbore, countersink. So I'm going to do simple. What's the hole tap type? Simple, clearance, tapped, or tapered. Well, I'm going to say simple in this example because we're just doing a drill. We're not tapping it. And then you can see drill point. Is it flat or is it angle? So I'm going to do angle. And if I kind of rotate, you can sort of, it's kind of hard to see. You'll see how it's doing that angled drill point at the bottom. Okay. So here's my tip that I want to share with you. See this blue little dot? I'm going to grab it and move it around, and you can see I can reposition this hole. And you'll see that other little blue dot, which I can't really point to, but it's right above where I'm at right now. All I have to do is get near that, and you'll see it snap right to the center of the shaft. I didn't have to do any offsets or measuring or anything. It's going to automatically snap to the center of that part. Okay. So now what I want to do is start filling in this information. So we know that this drill is a 5/16 according to the dimension drawing. Oops, that's the diameter. So I think I said length, but yes, the diameter is 5/16. So I just type that in, and I don't know if you saw the circle get a little bit smaller. Let me do this like so. I'll come in here and say 5/16, and you'll see that it gets smaller. Then I want to specify the depth, and in this case, it's 1 3/4. So I could type in 1 3/4. I could type in 1.75. Doesn't really matter. And I get a nice live preview of what that's going to look like. And I'll say OK. And we've just created a drill that goes all the way into the part at a very specific distance. So if I turn on my section analysis, we can see what that looks like. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to put this hole, this 21/64, down through the top of it also. Okay, now here's another neat tip. I'm going to use the hole command again, and I'm going to click near the top. So I'm just going to click somewhere like that, and Fusion will automatically put it right at the top tangency of that. And let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, if I say hole and I click kind of over here, you'll see how it put it going that direction. If I click near the top, it's going to put it at the top. So again, didn't have to do any measuring or anything like that. Now this time I do want this hole to be a very specific distance from the end of the part. So I can just click on this face right here, and you'll see that it added in a reference right there. And I could type in, that is supposed to be 1.5, and you'll see the hole move over. So we're referencing the edge of this shaft, according to the drawing. Now I think it remembers the last dimension you typed in, but just to make sure, I'm going to come in here and say 5/16, and I say OK. I think my drawing, yep, I lied. My drawing I'm using is old. I changed it to 21/64, so that's what it should be. I'm going to leave it 5/16, but you guys are going to do the 21/64. So, okay. Now what's neat about this is if I zoom up, we can actually physically see that those holes are perfectly intersected with each other. And if we do our section analysis, I can see that in our section analysis. It looks just like our drawing. It's perfect. Okay. Let me turn off the analysis. So again, according to the drawing, we have this BSP pipe thread. And it's only 1/4 inch deep, and that's what this little symbol right here means, 0.25 deep. So if you're following the drawing and you don't know what that means, that's what it means. Okay, so another little tip here. I can't really modify this existing hole through here because the BSP pipe is going to be a different size than this drill hole through. So I need to create another hole. Again, I over-exaggerate and put it off to the side. I'll go ahead and drop it into place, and you'll see I'll probably get an error message or a warning or something potentially. Okay, I did, yeah, there we go. No target body found to cut or intersect. Why? It's because it's the exact same size. So what I'm going to do now is make this a little bit larger, like so. And I'm going to start going through. I want to do a simple, yes. But I want this to be a tapped hole. So I'm going to say tapped. Let me move this up a little bit. And according to the drawing, it's a BSP pipe thread. So I'm going to come down here and go to BSP pipe. And you can see that kind of changed a little bit. And then it says size is 1/16, but according to the drawing, it's 1/8. And you can see how that got a little bit larger. And it's also a flat bottom, so I'm going to change it to flat bottom. And I know that the depth, according to the drawing, is only supposed to be 1/4 inch deep. So after I do all that, you can see it gives me a nice preview of what that's going to look like. It automatically threads those holes for me, or that hole, I should say. It's a little bit bigger than the drill through that we did earlier. I'll say OK. And we now have the end of the shaft drilled through, or I'm sorry, tapped the correct distance. So again, to do that, I kind of made the hole a little bit bigger. That way it wasn't modifying the existing one, and then I came in and specified all of the settings. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do with the shaft is we're going to put in this Woodruff Key slot. Now, I do know that there's Woodruff Key tables out there and all that kind of stuff. I simplified things by actually putting dimensions on there. Instead of saying it's like a 206 Woodruff Key, I just went ahead and put dimensions on here for you. And so you can kind of see it's 7/16 from an edge. Looks like it's 1/8 of an inch up above this edge. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll create a sketch. And I'm going to show you a cool little trick here. Okay, you notice that all of my parts are visible. And sometimes that's nice, but sometimes it gets in the way. Well, right now I'm only working on the shaft. So I'm going to right click on the shaft and say isolate. And what this is basically going to do is isolate it. It's going to turn off all of my other parts and only show the shaft. And I do this quite often also, because I've already got the information from the 3D model that I want, so I don't really need to see those other 3D models. So it kind of simplifies my view. Okay, so now I'll say create a sketch. We'll do it on this front face. I'll create my circle, and again, I'm just going to throw it out here in space. I've mentioned this in previous live streams. I typically over-exaggerate things like to be farther away than they're supposed to be, and then when I put in my constraints or my dimensions, I can see it move into place, and it's a confirmation to me that everything worked correctly. So when you hear me say over-exaggerate, that's kind of what I mean, okay? So in this case, it's 3/4 of an inch in diameter. And I could probably move that, kind of closer to where it needs to be, something like that. Then I might come in and throw my dimension on here. Well, I know that it needs to be 1/4 of an inch up. So I'm going to go like that. Oops. Click. And that is supposed to be 0.125. Okay. And then I know it's supposed to be a certain distance over. And that's supposed to be 7/16. Okay. However, I'm starting to potentially see an issue here. And this is the mistake I was telling you about. If I look at my drawing, we can see that the Woodruff key is kind of close to the shoulder, and there's a lot of extra material over here. But when I look at my 3D model, it doesn't look like that extra material is existing. So that is why I mentioned before, usually after I've used 3D geometry, I might come in and verify my dimensions so we can see that the total length is 5 1/4. So we're going to check that here in just a bit. Let's go ahead and finish this Woodruff key. So I'll go ahead and select it, say extrude. So I've created the right diameter, and I've created it in the correct position. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating the actual keyway itself. I want it to be centered or symmetrical, so I'll come in here and change my direction to be symmetric. And now you can see we can specify the width of this keyway. And when I do symmetric, you'll notice I get this measurement, half length and whole length. Well, I'm going to click on whole length. And what that's basically doing is it's saying the distance from one side of the key to the other side of the key needs to be, in this case, it's 1/8 of an inch, so 0.125. You can kind of see how that updated. So we're going 0.125 from one side to the other, the whole distance. And I'll say OK. And there we go. I got my Woodruff key. However, let me go ahead. Oh, let me show you another tip. Here comes another free tip for all of you. I want to turn all of my parts back on. Okay. Now I could come in and click on these individual little light bulbs, but that would take quite some time, especially with a complex assembly. Well, if I right click on shaft, you'll notice it says show all components. But when I do that, nothing happens. And here's the trick with this. Basically what you're saying is at this level, show all of the components. Well, there's nothing underneath it. There's no other sub-assemblies or whatever. However, if I come up to the top level and say show all components, you'll notice it turns them all on. Okay, so this show all components is actually at the level that you're at. So it's a great way of turning on or off sub-assemblies or sub-sub-assemblies, etc. So make sure if you want to turn everything on, you go to your top level and say show all components. Neat little tip there. Okay, so now I can see what this looks like. According to the drawing, this is supposed to be 5 1/4. So I could come in here and do a quick measure from that face to that face, and it says it's 4 3/4. So again, we're off, but simple fix. I'll just come in here, press pull or extrude, doesn't matter. I like to start to drag to kind of get a visual over exaggeration. We'll say re-anchor to this back face here, and it's supposed to be 5.25. 5.25. We can see that that updates, and now the keyway kind of makes more sense. It's in here where it's supposed to be. If we look at our belt tightener, the finished assembly, you'll see that there's a nut on the end, and that's sure enough, that's why the shaft has to extend out past this end part there. So we were able to easily fix that. Or, let's undo. I could go all the way back to my sketch and add in, I could do a rectangle, I could do a line, it doesn't really matter. I could do something like that. Throw a dimension on here from that edge to that edge is supposed to be 5.25. You can see how that rectangle updated accordingly. But watch what happens when I say finish sketch. It didn't do anything. Well, that's because in the revolve, we only had 3 of these profiles selected, but I could come in here and add that as a 4th and say okay. So 2 different ways that we solve that problem. In reality, I would probably recommend updating the sketch. That's kind of your driving master of this part. Offset faces are really cool, but you kind of have to know, oh, I offset that face a certain distance, and it's different than my sketch. So I would recommend editing the sketch, and that's why I showed both of those methods. Okay, so the next thing is to add a thread to this. Here's another free tip for all of you. I will go ahead and say thread. What's the face? I'll go ahead and click on this face, and you'll notice that it's threading the whole thing. Well, right here, you'll notice by default it's set to full length. So I'm going to turn that guy off, and now I can specify the length of the thread. Well, I know, according to the drawing, it's 1/2 inch. By clicking on that face, Fusion was smart enough to say, oh, it's probably you want it to be a 5/8 by 11. So you can kind of see I could do 5/8 by 12, I mean fine threads, etc. But sure enough, according to the drawing, it's a 5/8 by 11 thread. I'll say okay, and there we go. Now, you'll notice that these threads are just like a decal, almost like a sticker. I could come in here, edit that feature, and say modeled, and it'll physically model those threads for me. But I would recommend not doing this unless absolutely necessary. For example, maybe you're 3D printing it or something like that. I would just leave it as a representation. That way it kind of speeds up everything. With all those extra edges and faces, it can start to slow down your machine as it's trying to calculate shadows and occlusions and all that kind of stuff. So I usually leave them as decals like you see there. Okay, last thing here is I'll go ahead and chamfer that edge. And in this case, it's a 1/16 of an inch. So I'll say 1/16, say okay, and we are good to go. That's our next part, designed exactly where it needs to be. Okay, this next part I'm going to do is the bushing, and then we're going to stop there. We've got about 15 minutes left, and then in part 3 we're going to do this pulley, and then just the rest of the really simple parts like a washer and a nut, etc. And I'll show you how I went about creating the exploded view. We could do rendering, etc. Now this pulley is a little bit more difficult, so I'm going to show some neat tips and tricks with that in our next session. But let's go ahead and do this bushing. Now it looks pretty simple, and I'm going to show you another neat little tip with this. So we can see that sure enough it's 2.5 in length. So let's jump in here. I'm going to create a new component and we'll call it bushing. Let me get my drawing up here for me. Yep, called bushing. Okay, so I'm going to create this one a little bit different. Again, to show you a couple different ways. I'm just going to say create a sketch, but instead of doing a revolve in the front plane, I'm going to sketch on this side plane. Okay, well, I know that I probably want to know the diameter of the shaft, so let's go ahead and project the shaft. And you'll notice as I get near geometry how it's trying to project all of that onto this plane. It's slicing right through the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that and say OK. And now I have a circle there. I'll create another circle using the center of that circle. Again, I think it's so cool that everything is projected off of this geometry, and this is going to be 1 1/16 in diameter. And I'm done. That's all I need to do. Actually, you know what? Let's speed things up here. I could come in here and draw. There's a groove. It's kind of hard to see right here, that goes all the way through the length of this bushing, and I think it's because it allows oil or whatever to go the full length of that bushing. So let's go ahead and draw that while we're in here. So I'll say rectangle, center rectangle. I use this one a lot. I really like it. I'll click on that projection point right there. Now I know that the width of this is supposed to be 0.125. Oops, 125. And the height of it is 1/64 of an inch. And it's going to be hard to show, but it's basically from that point up is 1/64 of an inch. But you'll notice the height here is showing the full height. So again, I could type in 1/64 divided by 2. And you can kind of see what that's doing. Okay? Or I could, let me just do like, let's do 1/32 of an inch. I think that's what actually it's supposed to be. My drawing is wrong. I apologize. I was like, that looks a little small. So this is supposed to be 1/32. My bad. So you can see I wrote it down wrong on my drawing. 1/32 overall height would be 1/64 total height. So let's go ahead and do that. The joys of live streams. Okay, so I now have that shape. I'll say finish sketch, click on this profile, and I'm actually going to back up really quick because I'm going to show you another tip that hopefully you all know about. I'm in my sketch. I've just completed adding my dimensions, etc. And you'll notice I'm still in my sketch environment, but I can click this profile, right mouse click, and say extrude, or say press pull. Watch what happens when I do this. I'm going to say extrude. It automatically kicks me out of my sketch, puts me into my extrude command. So instead of having to hit finish sketch and then go into extrude, I can actually activate the command while I'm in my sketch. Okay, pretty not self-explanatory. Similar to what we've done before, I'm going to come in here and say symmetric, the whole length, and the whole length of this is supposed to be 2.5. You can see how it's taking that profile and extruding it the whole length of 2.5. And I'll say OK. Now once again, there's a lot of geometry in the way, so I'm going to right click on my bushing and say isolate. We've turned off all of that other geometry. And now I can see what this bushing looks like. Now there's a groove in here, and there's many different ways you could create this. Some of you might draw a rectangle on the front face, dimension it, maybe revolve, cut that away. Maybe you could have drawn this complex profile originally and revolved it around. Absolutely, that would work. I'm going to show you an interesting tip here. Again, not saying this is exactly how you should do it. It's just a method of how you could do it. I'm actually going to draw that groove on this face. I'm going to say, create a sketch. And I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to draw a circle. Now we know that the diameter of this is supposed to be 13/16. And when I draw that circle, you can see, sure enough, there it is. But it's on this end face. Now here's the magic. Check this out. I'm going to select those two profiles. I'll say extrude. And if I start extruding, it's going to extrude from the end of this part. But right here under start, you'll see it says start at the profile plane, and that's exactly what it's doing. Well, I could come in here and say, let's offset that plane. How far do we want to offset it? 7/16. Now, you'll notice it went the wrong direction, so I'm going to type in minus 7/16. And what it's actually doing now, it's kind of hard to see, but it took my profile, it's offsetting at 7/16 and then doing the extrude cut. And in this case, 5/16. We can kind of see a little update of that. And there we go. Let's do the analysis really quick so you can see what happened. So basically, I drew my profile on this end face. Then I did the extrude command and said, start 7/16 of an inch in, and then do the cut. So again, it kind of simplifies. Instead of creating like a complex sketch and doing revolves and all that kind of stuff, I kept it simple using just a circle and then using this offset plane option. So hopefully you found that kind of useful. Maybe down the road you'll be able to use that. Okay, I want to show everything, so I'm going to right click at the top and say show all components. Everything's kind of ghosted out. Well, if I activate my top level component, we can now see everything. And we've actually done quite a bit today. We've gotten the 2 pins done. We've got the shaft done. We got the bushing done. I like to turn on my analysis really quick just to kind of verify everything. I'll look at the front and we can see that these pins look really good. They sit right up against the frame. If we kind of move up here, we can see that the shaft fits perfectly in these holes. The Woodruff key is in there, or I should say the Woodruff key slot is in there. And we can see the bushing, and you can actually see how this is all going to work. Where if they screwed in some kind of a grease gun in here and was able to inject some grease, it would actually go into this groove right here, which actually then goes into this groove that goes all the way across. Now, I showed how to do the analysis last time, but if you don't remember how I did that, let me go ahead and delete it and show you the quick and easy way of creating a section analysis. So under the Inspect menu, Section Analysis. Okay, and it allows you to pick on a face or even a plane. Now I know that this plane slices exactly centered through my whole assembly, so I'm going to click on that plane. And there you go. You can kind of see how it's sectioning through. I could change the distance if I wanted to, and kind of almost like an MRI or a CAT scan or whatever. So you can kind of slice through it. You can change the angle of it. So we could rotate this to be like 90 degrees. And we could look at it up and down. kind of slice through it this direction. See what that looks like. And you can even have multiple sections. So for example, I'll come in here and say section analysis. I'll do that face again, say OK, and you'll notice I now have 2 of them. And I could toggle between multiple ones. So, and then if I don't want to see it anymore, I just hit the little light bulb next to analysis and it's a toggle on or off. Okay. With that, hopefully you absorbed some of these tips and tricks that I shared on today's live stream. The part 3 of this, we're going to finish this guy up. We're going to put in the nut and the washers and the Woodruff key. Then I'll show you how I created that drawing, how I created that exploded view. Before we end, I want to add a plug. It's about a month away, a little bit less than a month, for our Fusion Academy in Portland. I'm hoping Aaron has posted some stuff out in the chat about that. If you can attend, I highly, highly recommend it. Marketing just shared a really cool video about what is Fusion Academy. Hopefully Aaron linked that video. You can go watch it. Little cameo of me in there that I think is pretty fun. So if you can make it, I highly, highly recommend it. Basically, pretty much all of us from Autodesk on the Fusion team will be there, answering questions, meeting people, doing classes, etc. If you have ideas for future live streams, please make sure you put them in the comments so we can kind of see what those are and add those to our list. We are, because of the summertime, everybody's on vacation and travel and stuff, we are going to start doing these about once a week. Instead of twice a week. So definitely make sure that you subscribe, hit the little bell icon, and that will, I think, subscribe you to our channel and alert you when these upcoming live streams are happening. And if you haven't already, make sure you've signed up for the Fusion 360 Facebook group. There's a lot of really cool people out there that are sharing what they're designing in Fusion. We post stuff out there about upcoming live streams, etc. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you on a future live stream. Thank you.